Well, hello everyone. We're going to do some ag leasing basics today. My name is Paul Geringer and I'm the Extension Legal Specialist in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics at the College of Ag and Natural Resources at the University of Maryland. I'm also a team member, as we will see here, with the Ag Law Education Initiative. You can see up on the screen our web address is umaglaw.org. Screenshot of our website. If you look here, you can see that we have a publications library, legal resources, which is a website, a tab designed by the University of Maryland's Carey School of Law. Their law library put together some resources to help people be able to search legal information that they need to know, news, and then a quarterly update, and then a way to contact us. So you can check out here whenever you want to know what the group is up to, but I should point out what the group is. It is a group partnership between University of Maryland College Park, where I'm at, University of Maryland Eastern Shore, and then finally the University of Maryland Carey School of Law in Baltimore. We work together to sort of provide educational resources available to the general public, the ag community, whoever, to help farmers and anyone involved in agriculture better understand the legal concerns they might have. Some other information for you about our project. If you don't want to look at the website, you can follow us on Twitter, you can like us on Facebook. We have information there. We try to post the latest information when stuff becomes available on the website. And then under that publications tab, if you go to it, you can look there. We have a directory of Maryland State Bar attorneys in their ag law section to help you find an attorney. We also have overview articles of Maryland's right to farm law, the ag leasing booklet that will go along with this presentation, and then an overview of Maryland's labor laws that involve agriculture. And we have more in development, so again, it's good to check the website, check Twitter, check Facebook to see when stuff becomes available. So now, before we get into the meat of the presentation, I have to give my normal disclaimer that if you've ever heard me in a presentation, I have to give it. I am an attorney, so nothing you hear today is legal advice. Okay, we've got that covered, so let's continue on with the main part, what you want to hear. So what does it take to be a valid lease? What are the requirements involved in this? Well, first we need a valid contract, and we do have a contracting video available if you want to watch it to kind of get an idea of what a valid contract is. We need to know the extent of the property to be leased. This doesn't mean the address of the property. We want a legal description of the property so we know what exactly is being leased here. We want to know, sort of have an idea of how many acres it's going to be in the end. We want to know how long that lease is going to run. Is it going to run 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? How long is it exactly going to run? And then we want to know a definite rental rate, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But you're going to notice in none of that did I say it has to be in writing. In no time, only in one case does the lease need to be in writing, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. But as long as it meets the 4 requirements, here it can be a valid lease even if it's oral. But it's a good idea always to get it in writing, just so you have sort of a receipt of what was agreed to by the parties. So when does a lease need to be in writing? Well, a lease needs to be in writing when it is longer than 1 year. So my example here is you have a lease that began on January 1 of this year and ends at the end of the year in 2018. It's a 4-year lease. That is going to need to be in writing. But if you have sort of the same lease that runs just from January 1 to December 31st of this year and could be continually renewed at the end of each year, that is not a lease for longer than 1 year, because theoretically you could end at the end of the first year. That's what we see a lot of in ag. Those leases don't need to be in writing, but again, it's just a good idea to get them in writing. Why? Because history tells us that leases like that run for a long period of time, and people may not remember what was agreed to 2, 3, 4, 5, 20 years down the line. So what do you need to think about when you're negotiating these leases? Well, you need to pick the right economic gain, and this is going to come into that definite rental rate that we talked about before. So you need to have an idea. Do you want a cash share? Do you want a cash rent? Do you want a crop share rent? Or do you want a flex cash lease? A cash rent is just so much per acre per time period. It's usually 1 year. It could be, you divide it up over the months. Could be quarterly, could be every 6 months. It just depends on what works best for you. Crop share is where the landlord takes a percentage of the crop and pays a percentage of the yield increasing expenses in exchange for allowing the tenant the right to use the farmland. And then at the same time, a flex cash lease is a new type of lease that's come about because in the Midwest, producers liked crop share leases, but farm size became too large to keep up with the record keeping. So if you had to keep track of all those yield increasing inputs, it becomes a little tedious. Flex cash leasing is a little more incentive towards the landowner to give you a long-term lease. I am not the expert on these. Basically, the idea is you take a base cash rent and then flex it based on, which basically means it could be increased based on how either yield, gross revenue, or price does at the end of the year. And if you need to know more about these, I would tell you to go to Iowa State University's website. They're sort of the experts on this, and they have a lot of people that have done a lot of work on these type of leases. When you're developing this rent, this economic gain, look at your cost of production and look at what your operation can support. This is going to help you put the rent into terms that you know you're going to be able to support. You won't have rent that's way too out of line, and you're going to know that if rent's way too out of line with what the landlord thinks, you may not want to take that farm on. So what are good resources available for you? Well, one is aglease101.org. They have worksheets available that can help you work through a cash rent, a crop share, and then a flex cash, depending on what you want to do. They have you work it multiple ways, so you sort of get a range, so when you walk into a negotiation, you sort of know what the high and the low is and sort of how best to negotiate with the landlord. A newer resource that's just become available is this Fair Rent, which is available through the University of Minnesota. And this is just a website that has similar worksheets as aglease101.org, and you can input your cost of productions in there and again get a range as to what would be a good rent for you in the end. So what are some other things you need to think about when you're developing these leases? You need to decide early on who's going to take care of improvements on the property and how repairs are going to be handled on that. If there's a fence, for example, specify who does what on that, and then at least know what the dollar amount is. That if tenant makes repairs up to $200, is that the threshold? Then will landlord get involved? Will rent be reduced in some way? How are expensive repairs handled on the property? That's always good to get handled with initially. Know if the landlord can come back on the property during the term of the lease. I know in ag we usually allow the landlord back on the property during the life of the lease, but it's also good to specify in the lease when the landlord can come back on the property, for what reasons. That way if there are issues down the road, everyone sort of knows when they can come back on the property. Specify what happens to growing crops if the lease is terminated. Typically courts do not provide the best solutions for this. It's typically better to provide language in the lease that at least allows tenant reasonable times to come back on the property to harvest that crop. Specify what happens if you're late with a rent. This is an area I get a lot of calls on here lately with people being late with rent. It's just good to put it out there in the lease to know when does an eviction process start. And then before adding any improvements to the property, you want to talk to the landlord about the improvement, see if they want to help with the cost. Take pictures, because under Maryland law you do have the right to take that improvement with you. So we want to know what the condition of the land was before you did it. And then the best thing is just always keep accurate records of what you did to the property, how things were done, especially if you're doing a crop share or flex cash rent, to where that's going to become an issue. Then one other thing to look at, this is a blog that Ashley Newhall, who is another legal specialist at College Park, and myself, we put together, and we always try to put up helpful information out there out of recent court decisions involving ag leases. We also try to compile information on the latest cash rent data when it becomes available for USDA, for Maryland, and also Delaware. So what are some takeaway points from this and kind of summing it all up? Always think worst case scenario and develop strategies early on how to fix those solutions. That's going to create a better leasing situation for you. And having those strategies in place makes your life easier down the road. And then finally, the biggest thing to think about, and I haven't hit upon this in this video, is always remember that if you are going to put it in writing, which I hope you do, it may not always be one document. You may have a series of emails back and forth, series of letters, some sort of series of writings between the two of you. Always reduce that down to one document so everyone is on the same page as to what the lease entails. But thank you for watching this, and if you have any questions, you can contact me. My phone number is on there. My email and my Twitter feed is on there. You can contact me in any way and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.